Ah, there we go. Bonjour, mes amis. And thank you so very much for your patience, in particular, the last minute cancellation last week. I wasn't feeling well, and I'm mostly back to normal. There's a little bit of a post-viral cough, and I'm sure you will be blessed with the sounds of that at some point this evening. So thank you for your grace and your patience there. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Dr. Krista. I'm the Chief Science Officer here at the DNA Company, and it is my privilege and pleasure to continue moderating and supporting this collective of New Year and New View. So for those that have been participating weekly, you'll already know that I'm going to recap what we're doing just in case there's any newcomers. So this is an offering from DNA Company to the end of supporting people at the turn of the year. You know, a lot of people try to make New Year's resolutions, and then come January 21, we're recognizing, you know, it's a rough day of the year that we've fallen off whatever bandwagon or whatever resolution. And often those resolutions have to do with weight loss or some form of health goal and betterment. What we wanted to offer was more an end. You know, we started this at the end of January, acknowledging that effort of very much like, let's revolutionize the world without addressing root cause, without personalizing to me, often doesn't get people very far. So we are trying to support those people with true health goals, with true change, with true movement towards away from kind of this crash dieting, this crash health plan, into a space of how do we truly form that goal? And then how do we really found that with action, backed by science, backed by support of us and of community? How do we get you to wherever it is from a health perspective that you want to go? And so every other week or so, we meet together in community where we talk about various topics. Often, especially as we're digging more and more into the dirt these days, we're going to be focusing a lot more on genes. We encouraged you at the beginning of this, if you were interested in understanding your own genetic makeup, to get a test. And now that, you know, people have had that chance, most people have the results now, you know, we're going to be able to start digging into some of these results and allowing that to empower how you go about achieving your health goal. You know, so the first few weeks, we really talked about mindset. We talked about ensuring you understood your why. We talked a lot about finding a why that sits often beyond yourself, be it the people you care for, be it a vision of your life, you know, something that will get you out of bed on days that your health, you know, plan might be a little bit more tricky. We talked about the need for discipline. We talked about the need for resilience and perseverance. In particular, you know, sometimes some of our lofty goals don't align every day with what our body is able to offer, but that resilience and that persistence to keep on and keep going. And the last few weeks, we've talked a lot about diet and nutrition. Last week, we talked about, or last session, sorry, about 3 weeks ago, we talked about sleep. And so in this ongoing effort today, we're going to be talking about mood and behavior, which is something I think for the longest time, in particular in kind of this diet industry of one size fits all, in the sense of drop your calories, exercise more, you're going to be great. You know, diet, mood, behavior, and kind of your experience within your body was often neglected. And so I think today we're going to sit both with the ideas of how your genes will impact how you experience the world, how they're going to impact how you experience it, interpret it, and that lens to how you go about chasing your goals, how you can go about being mindful of how best to chase your goals based on who you are, based on your genes, right? And we'll also really talk about how mood and behavior can play into a lot of our goals. You know, we queried the community. We really want this to be interactive. We want this to be led by you. And so when we asked you at the beginning, what are you all here for? It was a third split, right? About a third of you are looking for weight loss, a third of you for increasing energy, and another third really looking towards fitness. So to that end, today we hope to really talk about how mood, how behavior underpins this, and how your genes will really, you know, not necessarily dictate, but something you need to be aware of, so that as you go about your goal, you know, you're ready for the days you may not feel great. And how do we minimize those days? How do we keep you on track? And I have a wonderful, glorious panel that's going to help me out. And before I allow them to introduce, I know that we asked a quiz because we really wanted to make sure today's discussion was grounded against what you all are experiencing. So the powers that be, the voice of God or the technology of God, if you could just share those results with me. I just want to take a quick overview so that as our presenters are introducing themselves, I have a question. I'd love if you could share a little bit about yourselves in the chat. So we asked the question of, what can get in the way of your goal? Be that a fitness goal, a weight loss goal, whatever that might be. Approximately 40% of our audience here just says feeling overwhelmed got in the way. I can empathize with that. And I think in particular, people who have their genes in front of them, we can really speak to how genes can play into that. And more importantly, what you can do about that. 20%, very honest. I appreciate this, said low to no motivation. I value your honesty. Thank you. Being honest is the best way to start. 6% of our crowd is struggling with anxiety and depression, or at least in some way that it's preventing things that they want to be doing. I see that, I feel that it's a chicken and egg of sorts, right? It's difficult to figure out what begets what, but we'll speak to that because that's important. And lastly, there's a solid quarter of you that said other. And so for that solid quarter, that 26% that said other, I'd really love, while our panelists are introducing themselves, if you could maybe offer a little bit of light onto what is your barrier, in particular from a mood and behavior perspective, so we can speak to it and we can support and guide. So I'm going to allow our panelists to introduce themselves. We know both of them from previous sessions. Justin in particular helped us kick off our first two sessions. I know he's a crowd favorite, in particular when it comes to to motivation, to habit change, to how do you actually take the crazy, flighty academics and change it into behavior. And then we have the most magnanimous Felicia, who I'm going to be very biased, has glorious hair today. Thank you very much to your hair. But I'll allow Justin and then Felicia and her hair to introduce themselves. And again, please, I'd love to know what other means, just as our hosts are introducing themselves. So Justin, please.
Hello, hello. Good to see everybody again. And for the record, my hair is pretty friggin' nice as well. So feel free to mention that in the comments if you agree. My name is Justin, and I'm very glad to see everybody back here. I hope you guys are all on track, staying motivated. I'm really here to help with the accountability side of things. I'm into this whole staying accountable kind of component to this, because understand that you are it. It's like you are the one who can pull this off. And you're the only one who can mess this up, right? It's on you. So staying motivated, staying, disciplined, staying consistent with what we're doing here, I think that's what actually gives you the results. So here to give you a little bit of motivation today. And I love talking about mood and behavior, because the behavior side of things is so exciting, isn't it? Because we talk about, the science behind the genes and all these different factors that go into how we interpret stimulus. I like the part where we put our feet on the ground and do some stuff. Actions are always going to be louder than words. So hopefully we can keep you motivated and get some action today.
I love that. Please. Yeah.
Well, hi, I'm glad to be back. Yes, my hair is curly today. It's usually straight, but it's Texas humid, so this is what it is. But I'm glad to be here. I'm excited to talk about mood also, and what motivation. That's what I preach on all the time. Training people is motivation and what's going to keep us going, and what are the barriers that we come up against that we can overcome, and how do we overcome those obstacles, and taking it one day at a time, and what does it all look like? So I'm excited to dive into this and just see what y'all have to say, and talk about how we collectively move forward, because that's what it's all about, right? Moving forward, not ever behind.
I love that. I agree. And I'm looking in the chat here, and I'm grateful to those that have offered context to their other. So I'm hearing some people, Vicky, lack of time. Hear you, girl. We're also seeing, kind of a generalized comment of fatigue or no energy, which, is kind of, I would imagine, partially a little, there's many reasons for that. So I'll be curious to us digging into that. We have some fear of failure, right? Which I again value the honesty there. I think being able to articulate that fear is a very wise and spectacular start. And then I'm also seeing a lot of just lack of time, too many commitments. Um, so someone's clearly a Trekkie in here, and they're looking for a Viking mind meld capacity. So I've seen Star Trek now. It's I love that. Good job, Dirk. And then there's some other people who struggle with maintaining their motivation. And then we also have one very honest person. Thank you, Laura. She loves her wine. And I would imagine that's, again, a little bit of a perpetuating thing, because wine one night makes the next day a little bit more difficult, especially when it comes to motivation and adhering to goals. And so how do you kind of balance that out, right? In particular, when wine is something that we're leveraging to support our mood or kind of soothe our moods. Yeah, so I wonder if we could start off with a little bit, before we dig into genes, before we kind of dig into anything else, I want to start off with just a little bit of normalizing around bad mood, around anxiety, around depression, right? Because I think beautifully the shift in mental health conversations over the past 10 years has been one to more and more acknowledge them, right? If we were to jump back 20 years, these sorts of things were not really talked about. If someone was depressed to the point where they were staying in bed, people would really just not acknowledge it. And now we're starting to appreciate that it's something that can exist on its own as its own ailment, or, and I think this is important, something that can be a byproduct of a current health state, right? We're seeing that certain gut biome, right, will beget or is closely linked to depression. We're also seeing, and we'll talk about this, certain genomic pictures do not guarantee depression, but they can increase likelihood, right? And so I'd love if we can just talk a little bit right now to just talk about how it's normal insofar as everyone experiences it. We have to be mindful when it's something that is persistent, something that's getting in the way of things, but there's an element of it's normal. And there's an element that almost everyone throughout the course of their life is going to experience it to some different degrees. And it will impact health and life goals. I know when I go through periods of low mood, I struggle to kind of continue on. It feels like there's almost energy and effort that I've just enough to do what I need to do that day, let alone over and above to achieve some goal, be that a health goal, a professional goal, a family goal, whatever that might be. I just want to spend a little bit of time just honoring the fact that it's part of the human condition, and it's something that, regardless if you're experiencing it now, might be something you're experiencing in the future. Yeah, Justin, Felicia, do you see this in the people that come to you, or do you see it in yourselves?
Yeah, absolutely. I see it in both. Yes, I'm human. I mean, obviously I do come against that. I do a lot of self-talk, a lot of, I'm worthy. We're all worthy. We're all beautifully and individually made. And so self-talk is very important, because it's a proven fact. You'll end up believing what you say about yourself. If you say it enough, you end up believing it. And it's usually a lie. If it's negative, it's a lie. So I do a lot of self-talk, and obviously being in the gym. We'll talk about that later, but obviously that endorphins. But yes, a lot of people come to me at all. Yeah, I'm stuck, or I'm in a rut, and how do I get out of it? And I'm like, well, we have to change something. Something's got to change.
Yeah.
And change, there always comes something positive if you're in the right direction.
Yeah. Justin?
Yeah, so that's definitely something that I encounter often, both just in my own brain as well as with all my clients across the board. And it's been that way since I was just a personal trainer, nutritionist, a supplement salesman, like literally since my career began. I've had clients that have had that kind of a struggle, psychologically. And I always bring it back to the internal narrative, just like Felicia just said, because, the mind is a garden. And what we feed grows, and what we starve dies. So when you get that little spark of a negative thought about your life, The more that you start to go down that path, it tends to grow and it tends to build, and it becomes the kind of dominant voice in your head. This is
Yeah.
a momentum game, right? Fitness, health, wellness, it's all about momentum. So if you kind of feed the negative narrative, right, it's going to grow, it's going to build. The next thing you know, it's your default setting. I talk a lot about that, default settings. So I'll say something that's slightly controversial because it's a mental model I chose to adopt regarding depression, because I would say I'm someone who, in fact, did suffer in that way for quite some time. And I choose not to look at depression as a disease, right? They say that it's a disease. I choose not to look at it as a disease because I don't think that your mind can be permanently placed in a state of negativity. I think that we can actually empower ourselves to talk ourselves out of that day by day. Now, there's genetic components in there that can make it more difficult to do that. But understand that when we entertain thoughts, what does it mean to entertain? If someone comes to your house and you choose to entertain them, it means you're letting them in and you're offering them chips and dip and you're giving them something, right? So you need to learn how to slam that door when it's a negative thought. Don't let it in, don't entertain it. Instead, nourish what's good, right? Nourish the positive narrative. That's what's going to grow if that's what you choose to feed.
Yeah, and I would, and I wonder if we can kind of tease apart a little bit this controversial opinion, because I want to give voice to people. There are people who suffer and deal with major depression and other sorts of conditions where it's not an element per se of just self-talk. Because if it was an element of self-talk, I promise people who are struggling with those conditions would find a way to talk themselves out of it. Now, I do acknowledge there's going to be presentations of low mood and anxiety and other such things where there's an element of self-talk has gotten you in there. I just want to hold space that I think there's two sides to that story, and I would offer not everyone walking around with marked anxiety, with marked depression is something that they've done that to themselves. Is that fair?
It's totally fair, and that's why it's a chosen perspective, right? Because that
Yeah.
is in fact the default setting for many people, and I would say myself included, right?
Yeah,
So when I say
absolutely.
chosen mindset, I'm actually trying to strip the power of
Yeah.
that. It's like when we say addiction is a disease.
Yeah.
It very well may be, but if we choose not to look at it that way, we can strip it of its power. Surely you should like my mental model if you are in fact suffering majorly with anxiety or addiction or depression. If we use certain language that strips it of its power and we give ourselves the power now to step out of that, that's what makes us the most competitive. That's what gives us the best chance of getting out of it. So it's a chosen mindset is all I'm saying. I don't want to
Yeah.
denigrate anyone who's suffering. I
Yeah.
suffer as well in that way, but it's an empowerment process. That's all I mean
Absolutely.
with that.
Yeah, no. I know the core of what you were saying, so I just wanted to make sure it was clear to the people listening today, because I think it's important. We don't want anyone who's struggling with a condition like that to come in and feel like they've caused it themselves. And I know today part of our goal is to go a little bit more specifically through genes that can create or predispose us towards certain mindsets, towards or make them easier, right? And so I want to get into that. But before we do that, I'd like to also offer, I think, to me, often, and this assumes we're not someone with a diagnosed depression or anxiety, right? When it's more a symptom, I often will use anxiety and depression as a symptom of just kind of a larger unwell body. And I'll kind of use myself as an example here. So I'm a lovely little celiac. If I'm exposed to gluten out in the wild, my body gets very angry with me. And I'm a silent celiac, meaning it's not obvious GI disruption that I'm able to trigger or like be aware of what's going on. One of my first symptoms, if I'm exposed, and it happens a lot because the world is not very careful when it comes to those sorts of things. One of my first symptoms is actually somewhere on the spectrum of anxiety and depression. I'll wake up the next day after having been out for dinner at a restaurant or with family, friends, whatever that might be, and I will be markedly depressed or anxious. And that's one of my first signals that something is amiss in my body. And so I would also offer, as we continue on this conversation, right? Because like I do the things for my health, but there's moments where I wake up in that way. And to me, it's a trigger. And so I would also really offer, people as we're going through these sorts of things today, as we're thinking through how does mood and behavior contribute to my larger picture, also see it to a small extent as a signaling of what is going on in the body and if things are working well or not. Right. And so I'd really offer that as well, because I think sometimes we see, to your point, this is something we can't control, or we see it just as a mindset thing. But I would offer sometimes it's also a response and a reaction to things that aren't sitting well in the body. So in my case, if my food's adulterated with the delicious of gluten, my body is not happy, and then my mind tells me that. Yeah, yeah. So why don't we jump a little bit into the genes, because I'm seeing some asks for that, and I'm also we have someone in our chat today, and calling this out very specifically to Felicia. We have a member in our audience who is 70, and their comment to us is twofold. They're struggling with a large volume of information. You come to the right place. Part of our goal is to discern and help you deal with the Dr. Google of the world. But secondly, she's also saying there isn't a great offering towards the older crowd, that people kind of are like, you're old, either don't bother, or they just don't know how to properly speak to it. So I'd offer to you, I know you just commented to us, so I won't share your name with everyone just in case there's a privacy element, but welcome. We're so glad you're here. And we don't think that being 70 means that you don't get access to health anymore and that you can't change these sorts of things. I call it Felicia in particular because she will work with older clients, and really she's able to see true physical change in them and betterment in them, really representing that at any age you can change and grow your body, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I just want to add, yeah, it's never too late. Never too late. I've worked with a numbers of older people, and all fitness levels, good, bad, in between, and anything is possible. No, the older generation is living longer, and I think that we have more access to be healthier, and more things to do to keep us healthier. So no, yes, I work with lots of older people, love to do it, would be happy to help you. Maybe, talk with you some other time, like on what it is you do.
Mhm.
What does that look like for you? But I'm very interested. Never too late. Never too late.
Yeah, and I'm seeing that kind of echoed within the chat right now. There's a lot of people cheering on the olders, as well as we have people who are older here. So welcome. We're so glad you're here. So I wonder, let's jump into the genes a little bit. So Justin, when someone comes to you and says, I have low mood, when you're looking at especially their mood and behavior report, what's one of the first places that you're going to start and kind of look at and offer context to, for, at least from a genetic perspective, right? We know there's so many ways you can get to a point where you're not feeling great, anxious, depressed, whatever it might be. But from a genetic perspective, what are the first things that you're looking for in those reports?
Yeah, so I mean, I will fully dissect the mood and behavior profile, because I think each area of that is interconnected, and I'll also zoom out a little bit. There goes one of Justin's favorite terms, zoom out, and look at the gut health component and all these different things that you mentioned, Dr. K. I'll usually look at the dopamine profile for one, because I like to know if they're a high binder of dopamine or a low binder of dopamine. And it's an interesting system because it's actually an ancient reward system, and it's kind of there to provide us with good feelings associated with either pleasure or reward. And to me, it lends itself to motivation. Like if you have high binding dopamine, you're probably going to be a bit of a more motivated person, but there's certainly a capacity there to have a double-edged sword with that one as well, because if we're using the dopaminergic pathway for pleasure over purpose, over, something positive, reward, it can lend itself to addiction. It can lend itself to binging tendencies, all these different things as well. So I look at the dopamine pathway. I look at the serotonin pathway as well, because it's a big contributor to mood and whether or not you have a propensity to be chronically low in that way. So I look at dopamine, serotonin. We need to look at your gut health. We need to look at a number of different kind of factors there. If you guys have your DNA done already and you're looking at your mood and behavior profile, there's going to be a million different little subsections there, right? It's going to talk about logical versus empath behavior. It'll even talk about career stuff. There's a lot of little branches to it. So to simplify it a little bit there, just so that you can kind of digest it, each one of those subsections is actually relating back to one of 4 pathways. So there's only 4 things that we're actually talking about, right? We're talking about dopamine, we're talking about serotonin, we're talking about noradrenaline, and we're talking about BDNF. So for the most part, when it comes to, low mood, I would say dopamine and serotonin are among the bigger players there. And once we know how your genes are, now we know how to navigate. We know what to do about it. I always talk about stacking W's, for example, when it comes to the dopamine pathway. That's one of my favorite things to talk about, stacking wins, because you can link your dopaminergic system to the accomplishment of positive tasks and propel you towards an actual goal that way. Or you could use it and get dopamine for whatever, vaping and snacking and things that might have some downsides to your health. So knowing the pathway first, and then knowing what we're going to do with it to turn it into a superpower as opposed to a detriment. That's usually what I do with those pathways. Oh, you're muted there, Dr. K.
I'm muting myself just in case I'm coughing in between. I don't want to disrupt you. I tend to, when someone comes to me with low mood, one of the first things that I tend to look at is going to be one of 2 things. So serotonin, we're looking at 2 different SNPs. There are 2, I'm using SNPs, which is, I guess, we'll use genes, but looking at 2 different genes, we're looking at 5-HTT-LPR. Okay. And that one is, I kind of think of it like everyone, this is Napita. She says hello. She's one of the 2 queens in my home. And we're looking at 5-HTT-LPR is kind of like a recycler. All right. So when we think of serotonin, it is, a lot of people think of it, and I think this is of consequence to the pharmaceutical industry. A lot of people think of serotonin as the chemical that makes you happy, right? It's this thing that if you have enough, you're happy. If you don't have enough, you're depressed. And if you're depressed and we give you something that gives you more serotonin, you're going to be happy, right? But approximately 50 years of pharmacological evidence has said this is not the case, right? We know that SSRIs, SNRIs do not fix things, solve things. But what serotonin does do, it has, I think, of 3 main impacts of serotonin. First is absolutely a sense of mood and well-being, but it's not a sense of euphoria. It's more a sense of calm. This is what serotonin gives us, right? So it doesn't give us a euphoric sensation. It gives us that feeling of things are okay. And so when there is not sufficient serotonin, either the gut is dysregulated, it's not being made there, or from a genetic perspective, your 5-HTT-LPR, the recycler of serotonin, isn't working very well, that sense of calm isn't ready. Right. And so that can lead to overwhelm, that can lead to depression, that can lead to anxiety, that can also lead to this fear of failure, right? This little bit of like, ooh, I don't think this little bit of apprehension, right? Because serotonin is that thing that gives us a breath, right? So if you're looking at 5-HTT-LPR, the ideal form is 2 L's long, meaning you have a lot of information, compared to either an LS or an SS, which are short, so a less ability to access that sense of calm. And hear me when I say this, and Justin, hold me honest, none of this is fatalistic, right? There are people with the SSs, the less optimal, right, who have a really good sense of calm. This said, it's something that they need to cultivate and create. They are aware of this pathway and they almost have to work a little bit harder at it. I'm using air quotes there, but they're the people, that whereas maybe mental health practices for some are a nice to have or when things are rough, they're probably the people that need to practice it on a bit more of a regular basis. Yeah, so serotonin 5-HTPR is one of the first things I'll look at. Justin, I wonder if you can dig into BDNF a little bit, because this is a big one that will speak to both the overthinking and the overwhelm that some people talk to, as well as separate to it, the sense of depression and well-being. And later on, we can tie it a little bit into metabolism, because there's an interesting 2 birds, 1 proverbial stone here.
Yeah, so BDNF, right, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, is interesting. It's like a miracle grow for the brain, right? So it equates to your brain's ability to create new neural pathways. So there's something called neuroplasticity, right? And that's really something that we see with BDNF. It lends itself to neuroplasticity. And it's interestingly also known as the concussion gene, right? So that analogy I made, miracle grow, it's quite literally going to do that, because if you get a concussion and you don't have sufficient BDNF, you're going to have a lot more difficulty recovering from that, right? So BDNF is actually a direct kind of brain health neurochemical. I, full disclosure, have dysregulated BDNF. And one interesting thing that we find about it is it tends to make you have a bit of difficulty picking up new skills, but it makes you really almost more like laser focused on what you are interested in. So I joke about it because I can talk about genes all day, but if I have to go fix my car right now, I got to call my brother-in-law because I have no idea what I'm doing. Right. So it makes you a subject matter expert, interestingly enough, as well. It happens to be an easy one to upregulate, which is great because you are inherently going to have a little bit lower mood if you don't have enough of it, right? So that's why, and Felicia speaks about this all the time, the endorphins and the things that you get from exercise, BDNF also gets upregulated there. So it's the endorphins as well as the brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Both of those are being increased with things like exercise. Sauna is great for that as well. Breath work is great for that. Just going for a walk in nature, right? There's all these different ways that you can improve it, and it has a direct correlation to the quality of your brain. And the better quality of your brain, the better quality your thoughts are going to be, right? So we need healthy brains, and unfortunately we live in a world where there's a fair amount of heavy metal toxicity and things that can really be harmful to the human brain. So keeping it healthy with things like brain tap, the breath work, all these different things is actually going to help you with mood and your ability to learn new skills and things as well.
Yeah, yeah. I find for those who are struggling, especially with anxiety, depression, um, and sometimes you can get, there's an element of lost in a loop in that you don't know how to start, don't know where to start. I find sometimes, and you'd have to work with a practitioner for this, but sometimes leveraging supplements that will upregulate BDNF a little bit gives you a little bit of space to start working, right? Because I find sometimes the tricky with a lot of mental health issues, right, is you kind of get stuck in this cyclical hamster wheel of the condition. And it's really hard to find a point with which you can grasp and change some of that behavior. And so one thing I found, and I would really encourage, investigating this with a care provider that you have, especially if you're someone, so we're talking about two genes here for BDNF. The first one is aptly called BDNF. And so if you have either an AG or an AA presentation, those are both suboptimal, meaning you're not naturally inclined to be creating a lot of BDNF. Okay. There's also one special call out here. It's something called epistasis. It's a fancy way of saying if you have two unique gene presentations, you're also not going to have great BDNF. So the other thing you'd be looking for is TPH2. If between BDNF and TPH2, you have 4 Gs, so Gs across the board, you're also someone with poor BDNF tendencies, right? And so people that kind of need to offer a little bit more energy and effort towards their BDNF, be that the things that Justin has just mentioned, and by far those are the best. I don't want to pretend like a supplement can replace all of those, but I've found quite often, in particular for people who are struggling to find that motivation, and it truly is a sensation of minor anxiety, depression, supplements that support BDNF, so supplements with green coffee fruit extract, with lion's mane, align with a practitioner, because there's benefits and drawbacks to each of those. Those can give a little bit of a boost to BDNF. And with that space, you can start to shift the way you're thinking. You can start to shift and find grasp so that you can start some of the habits that will better pull you out of whatever kind of cyclical mood pattern that you're stuck in. Does that make sense? Yeah, because I think sometimes it's hard if you're stuck in bed with overwhelm, stuck in bed with anxiety or depression, to make that first day to the gym. We all know the gym with Felicia is going to be helpful, but sometimes getting there is not something you can do right off the bat. And so that might be the place of where supplements, medication, whatever you and your care provider land on. And I think your genetic report can really help support some next steps there. They're not dictative, right? Work with a care provider. These are complex conditions, but they're great places to start to know what naturally you're not strong at. If you're not naturally creating all that miracle grow, you have to figure out where you're going to get your miracle grow from, right? Yeah. Yeah. Any other thoughts, any tips or tricks that you guys have for, because it sounds like overwhelm and kind of that first step is a little bit tricky, for a lot of people that we're seeing within the chat. Any thoughts or comments as to other ways that you can go about that first step?
I think making a plan. I think the first step is making a plan, knowing where you are and saying, okay, this is where I want to be. But even if that first step is like taking a 10-minute walk, if it's just getting outside and breathing or sitting in the sunlight, if you live where you can sit in the sunlight for, I think it's the small things that add up to big things that you keep yourself. I think also it has to be mindful. I deal with anxiety, I'm not gonna lie, and sometimes I stop myself in the minute and go, okay, what is creating the anxiety? Why am I there? And then I'm like, okay, and I actually name it. Okay, I had this today, and this is what created it. And then I'm like, okay, so is it really gonna disrupt the rest of my day? Is it really, do I really need to hang on to it? Is it really what's helping me or hurting me? And 9 times out of 10, it's like, okay, it's just a refocus, that's not where I live, and that's not where I'm going to be. So I'm going to go do something small to help me. Maybe it's breathing. Maybe it's go sit in the sun. Maybe it's let that part go. Let it go. And I know it's easier said than done. I'm not saying just, oh yeah, let it go and it's gone. No, I'm saying, but be mindful. Like, is it really holding you back, or is it a problem, or is it just an inconvenience? Try to really decide where it is that you lay in that space. But walking always helps me. If it's just to get outside and breathe, always helps me, because it's like the only thing I know I can do. I can move. So I'm going to get up and just get some air. And that, just first steps. That's what I recommend.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. And your goals should be more important to you than to anybody else as well. So when we call it the first step, it's exactly that. It's like the journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. That's what they say. And if you look at Mount Kilimanjaro and you look at how far the top away is, of course, it's going to be baffling, because you recognize it's going to take 100,000 steps to get there. But it starts with that very first one, right? And then it's just that momentum game. I'm going to take another one tomorrow and another one the next day. You always have to ask yourself, are my energy, thoughts, and actions in alignment with the end result that I want? Staying in alignment is really what matters. This is an alignment process. It starts with checking your actions, right? Are my actions in alignment with the result that I want? AKA, am I eating properly? Am I exercising? Am I breathing? Do I have, a general productive day towards what that goal is? Sooner or later, you kind of graduate past the actions part of it, and you start staying accountable to your thoughts. Then you have to stay accountable to your energy. If all 3 of those are in alignment with the result you want, you really can't lose, right? What do I say about stacking wins? If all I do is win, you can't tell me I'm a loser. I've been winning, right? I've been winning. You can't tell me I'm a loser. So if we generate enough momentum, we have to get to that end goal eventually, right? So it's an alignment process. And if your thoughts and your energy aren't there, I would say start with your actions, right? Just do something positive today that you didn't do yesterday. I always try to wake up with a default mindset of, I'm going to do better than I did yesterday. You're really only competing against yourself with this. So try to do just that little thing that you neglected yesterday. Try to get it done today. And now we've got some movement happening, right? That's momentum.
Yeah. And I would really offer as well, I like this thought of do something differently, commit to a set of actions, start getting that traction. And I would really offer that, if you committed and dedicated to that and you find you're still not able to get that traction, really, really reaching out to a healthcare provider to figure out what is going on, right? Because it's not a natural state per se of humans to be kind of stuck in an endless loop and unable to get traction. And so sometimes having a third party, a healthcare provider come in and say, okay, well, let's evaluate what's going on. Let's see, is this a true case of anxiety, mental health, something along those lines? Or is this a case in my instance, right? Like celiac, and you keep getting bombarded by wheat, and that is the root cause. I think it's really helpful if you're trying to do these things, if you're trying to implement, and there's a true will and intention behind it, but you're not grasping anywhere, getting someone's opinion on what isn't working so you can address it. We don't ever want you kind of stuck in a hamster wheel, not moving forward because you think you should do it on your own. We're doing this in community on purpose because community is not only someone that you can reflect against, but get support from. So don't isolate yourself, leverage people within this community for support, and then leverage various healthcare providers if you're committed to something, but you're just not getting that traction, right? It's better that you figure that out 2 weeks in versus 2 years in. Is that fair? That makes sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. And I think that speaks to having a master plan versus
Yeah.
mastering the plan,
Yeah.
right? Because if you're not successful, either the plan sucks or it's a good plan and you're not sticking to it, right?
Yeah.
You need both of
Yeah.
those elements. So
Yeah.
a healthcare provider can help you to get the best case scenario, create a master plan that works. Now the onus shifts. Now it's on
Yeah.
you. Now we stick to the plan.
Yeah.
Then it's just a matter of surviving the timeline, right? Did you
Mhm.
stick to the plan for a week or was it a month? Because the end result is going to be very different there. If you stick to it for a year, I bet you're going to be an entirely different human being, assuming that the plan didn't suck in the first place, right?
Mhm.
So you're absolutely right. Get a good plan, and then we just master the plan daily. It starts over every day. It's a reset button,
Yeah.
right? And we just align ourselves again. We align ourselves again. We fight back. The world is going to throw variables in the way, and we need to learn to
Mhm.
just eat those for breakfast and get back to the plan, get back to the plan, right? That's how the momentum game works.
Yeah. And before we jump in, because often just for those that are new and joining us, and I saw we have a new person coming in from Australia. Welcome to the new person who's quite literally a world away from us across the pond. Before we jump into the questions and answers, and I really encourage you, if you have anything you want to share or ask, please do toss it into questions and answers. But before we get there, I did see a question here, and the question is a little bit of a shout out to you, Justin, because you kind of mentioned within our reports, there are 3 things that we're looking at, right? Dopamine, serotonin, BDNF, and the last one, which we have not addressed, and I would love if you could offer a little bit to it, is going to be noradrenaline. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, noradrenaline is it's a chemical that we feel. It's a chemical that gets released in response to like a traumatic situation, right? So a fear or anxiety based emotion is what it's going to kind of translate towards. And I think it's a pretty big factor when it comes to, setting goals and achieving them. What I find is interesting is there's a bit of a double-edged sword to it because I actually have among the worst case scenarios genetically for anxiety. And what's really funny is that I've stripped it of all the bad things and I actually
Mhm.
use it to motivate me. If I
Mm.
wake up and I'm anxious, it's a great time to hit the weights. If I wake up and I'm depressed, it's a great time to go make some money. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Or maybe just go do something for somebody else and take myself completely out of the situation. So aligning yourself with purpose over pleasure oftentimes helps that. Genetically, what I'm talking about is a gene called ADRA2B, ADRA2B, and that's the noradrenaline receptor. And we measure it as far as what's called indels and deletions, right? So it's either going to be I's or it's going to be D's. The ideal circumstance is to have 2 I's on there. That's going to be like the full version of it. And it's going to equate to how your body processes that noradrenaline. right? So 2 eyes, you're going to process it properly. And yeah, you're going to feel some anxiety, but it's not going to be an inappropriate amount, like an overwhelming amount. You're going to be able to handle it. If there's a D present there, or God forbid, doubles like I have, so I have what's called a double null, both D's, you're going to make a mountain out of a molehill. You're going to, whatever the event was, you're very likely going to blow it up into some preposterous proportion. So that's what I do. And yeah, I mean, if you have a baseline level of anxiety that's heightened, it can have a couple of different effects. Some people take it and get like a paralysis from it, right? They don't even want to get started. I think this speaks to what we're talking about today. Or if you're like me and you've kind of dissected it, you're going to take it and you're going to go, I have all this emotional energy today. I'm going to take it and use something. The analogy that I make is that it's an emotion, and emotions are energy in motion, right? Emotion. And it's like water behind a dam. So water is energy and it's stuck behind a dam. And if you have a lot of it, it can either power the turbines and power the town, or it can be very destructive. It can overwhelm the dam and destroy the town. So that's where the choice comes in. What are you going to do when you do feel anxious? Are you going to do something with it, something positive, something that makes you powerful? Or are you going to just go back to bed because today is just not the day? Day by day, you have to make the right choices, because emotions are energy in motion. Energy is great. I love being full of energy. So just know, if you have D's in there in that adjective 2B, you're going to be more likely to have kind of a default anxious mindset. And we're going to need to do something with that and turn it into a positive. Every gene we have, we want to turn it into a positive.
Yeah. And I would also, if I can be the contrary one, I don't know if there's per se an ideal presentation of this, more just different presentations. And the reason I say that, right? So with this agro, we're really talking about how sensitive to momentary stress are you. Noradrenaline is going to spike, be created when there's an instance of, for lack of better phrasing, fright, right? This is a little bit, attributable to that fight or flight response, right? You're wandering the jungle, you see a tiger, noradrenaline is one of the first things that's going to pop forward to help you fix that situation. And so for some people, in particular, people with that ID or that DD that are exceptionally sensitive to it, that's going to beget a stronger response to whatever is before the person. And so I would offer, there's a beautiful to that and there's a tricky to that. The beautiful is people with the ID or the DD tend to be a little bit more sensitive and empathic, right? They're more sensitive to what is coming at them in the world. And there's a beauty in that. I tend to see, in particular, from a healthcare provider perspective, these tend to be the GPs, the psychotherapists, those that bleed their human and have a heart. Compared to the II, again, this is just a different skill set, not better or worse. My IIs tend to be the surgeons, the ER doctors, the people that can deal with that burst of trauma before them, right? Those first responders. Neither one is better or worse, just a very different skill set. And so there's comments to each, right? If you're coming forward with that II, sometimes people are going to feel you as a little bit cold, and be mindful of that. And if you come in with the DD, you're the person that's going to be more sensitive. And so being aware of that, to Justin's point, knowing that when that stress comes your way, this is how body is going to respond, appreciating that, and then allowing yourself to choose, how do you respond after that? Seeing, do you cycle down, do you spiral down, or do you leverage that as a moment of, cool, let's move forward? Right? Is that fair as well, Justin? Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. And that's why we talk about genes, as far as once we know them, we can decide if it's a superpower or not. I can tell you 1000%, I'm a way better coach because of how sensitive I am to that. Like when I'm dealing with a client, a patient who they're going through something very intense, cancer or something like that. Even through Zoom, it's like I can literally feel their pain. I feel it. It's intense. And I'm a human feeling your human pain. And it makes me an empath, and it makes me care, and it makes me present. So to be cold and clinical can be useful as well, but I'm not the one doing surgery on you. I'm trying to help you through it as a human. So yeah, being a double deletion, yes, I may struggle at certain times, but
Mm,
it actually makes me better at what I do because I'm very much able to emote to my patients. So
yeah,
it's a superpower if you let it be a superpower.
yeah. And I think on the closing thought before we jump into the questions and answers, because I want to honor the fact that people have thoughts and want our opinions on things, I would also offer, I think, within groups in particular, for the portion of our group that's really focused on weight loss, those with either ID or DD, when you experience a traumatic event, when you experience something marked in your life, something negative, those with ID or DD tend to imprint that memory much more strongly within their brain. And the reason I bring this up is I think, we've all had moments in our life where we, have been belittled, harassed, hurt, attacked. Like, people aren't always kind. And those with those presentations, ID or DD, that memory tends to be embedded much more strongly within the brain. Quite literally, we can see a stronger pathway, nervous system pathway, right? And so what that can lend to is, especially when you're trying to approach things like weight loss and change, that can trigger a lot of really painful memories and get you a little bit more in your feels about it, because those memories quite literally are more salient and strong within the brain. And I bring this up not to say you're bound to your memories, but more to be aware of that, to Justin's point and Felicia's point, to be mindful of this is how your brain architecture is, and not to be beholden to it, just to honor it, be like, cool, yes, that memory's stronger in me. I'm still going to continue on, and I'm going to work to shift my relationship with that memory, right? So for those, especially in the weight loss or that are really striving towards something different, there's probably a lot of memories embedded. Don't be beholden to them in particular, and especially if your brain's a little bit more likely to tuck into those. We want to make sure that within this group, within our conversations, you see that you're not required to be your genes. You know about your genes, and you get to act and choose how you go about engaging with them. Justin, Felicia, any thoughts before we dip into our glorious little Q&A?
No, I just love the way you said all that, and finding out even in myself genes, and when I work with clients who I can see their genes, it's eye-opening, and it's almost, as like Justin would say, it's almost empowering, because now I know what I'm really truly working with, and I'm not like thinking, oh my gosh, I've got all this stuff, but then knowing that this is the way I'm made, which there are never any mistakes the way you're made, never. So it's beautiful. So how do I now work with knowing this is the way I react, this is how I respond, keeping myself in check. Okay, so I know that I have anxiety. So like I told you earlier, like, okay, so what is what's making me there? What's keeping me there? And I'm able to work through it. And I think it's beautiful. We just need to embrace it and learn to overcome those things. And it's a process. I get it. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint, but day by day. And that's all I say. Let's just take it the first 24 hours. And then tomorrow morning, like Justin said, it's a do-over. We're going to take the next 24 hours. And then you add all those days together, and you look back and, oh my goodness, it's been 12 weeks. Oh my goodness, it's been half a year. And you see how much you've grown. So you can set a goal, but let's just do it day by day. And there will be days you'll be like, okay, I didn't meet that goal. I didn't get there. Tomorrow I will, though. And you wake up the next day going, okay, let's go get it. Let's accomplish it.
Yeah. Justin, any thoughts before we jump into the Q&A?
Yeah, I think you guys nailed it, honestly. And it's, we talk about adversity and we talk about all these different things, and just understand that trauma introduces you to yourself, and it's like that's the real measure of who you are. It's like when things are going well, if you choose to measure yourself in that state, of course you're going to be doing okay when things are going well. When they're not, that's the true measure of your character, so that's a good time to I start the clock at that point when things are going wrong. And yeah, I mean, your trauma is the prerequisite to your life's purpose, that it makes you better if you choose to let it make you better. That's a theme that I always say. So again, I'm just giving you the power with this, empower yourself with it. And other than that, I'm ready to jump into some Q&A because it's one of my favorite parts.
Mm-hmm. All righty. The first question here from Andrew, and if my panelists will allow me, I'll probably answer this one and then allow you to chip in if there's anything after the fact. So he's asking if we can clarify the difference between genes, SNPs, copies, alleles, all the fun things. He said he can, oh, thank you for the homework. He said he counted about 52 different things that we test for. What does it all mean? So allow me to kind of give an analogy, if you will, to speak to all those terms. So if you think about your genome, the set of DNA that you have, I kind of like to think of it like a library. A library has a bunch of different books. So every cell in your body has quite literally the exact same library, the exact same set of books within it. But we know that all of our cells are different. So think of kind of each cell or each gene is expressed when a part of the body picks up a shelf off that from the library and says, cool, I'm going to read it and I'm going to make whatever this book tells me. Okay, so a gene we can kind of think about like a book. All right, now when you're within this book, this is where we get more into the terminology of SNPs and indels and CNVs. Okay, so let's start with SNPs. This is single, oh Lord, hold on, single polynucleotide, single, you're gonna have to help me out here, single nucleotide polymorphism. Thank you. I don't word very well, guys. It's been a long day for me. All right, so SNPs, I'm never gonna say that long phrasing again. SNPs, this is kind of think about like within the book, you take one page and the question is what information does that singular page have, right? And this is a very, from our testing perspective, we only look at the really important pages, such that if my book had one page and Justin's book had the opposite page, that clinically changes what we're going to do. Within most genes, most of the pages, interestingly, don't matter. We're learning that it's very specific pages that are impactful, right? One page will say curly hair versus a different page maybe saying straight hair. And that's the difference when we pick up the book that speaks to hair. Okay. Now, when we talk about things like CNV, which stands for copy number variation, less syllables, I'm good with it, or indels, which indel stands for insertion deletion. Justin spoke to this. Without getting too complicated, we're really looking at how much information does your book have. So for example, if we go back to the idea of indels with our ADRA2B, some books are going to have 2 I's, 2 insertions. They're going to have a lot of information on how do you manage noradrenaline. Compared to other books, Justin offered in his book, he doesn't have much information on this. So it's less information on how to manage noradrenaline. So again, think of your genome as a library. Individual genes or books on subjects. You pick one up and the amount of information, the type of information in there will curate what's going on in the body and how much access to information you have. So that's kind of the genetics 101 of it. Justin, any points that I should clarify there? Anything that I missed?
The only thing that I would add is that that's one of the things that's unique about the DNA company is that we do test for all of the above. I think that a lot of the companies, and I don't mean to denigrate any of them, it's just that most of these other genetic testing companies are looking mainly at SNPs, and they might look at a longer list of SNPs than we do, but we kind of look at the main clinically relevant SNPs, and then we look at copy number variations as well as the indels and deletions. And some of these CNVs are really, really relevant. Like your whole glutathione profile, well, 2 out of 3 that we look at are copy number variations. And it's a huge factor in how your body detoxifies. So I think that looking at all of these is very relevant for the health and longevity conversation. So I guess I'm just pumping our tires a little bit and saying that's what's great about our company is we do look at all of the above with those 3 different things.
Yeah, I think that's a solid point. I think mostly, and it's again, not to disparage, every company has different priorities, but often when you go for genomic testing, they're looking at the SNPs, the single nucleotide polymorphisms, a lot of
You got it.
You nailed it. You nailed it.
But a lot of companies will focus just on that because they have this concept that it's just the pages that are important. Again, remember, oddly, not every page is important. We kind of take a step back and we also appreciate the volume of information that makes us relatively unique because most companies are kind of just more sticking to the pages that that were kind of when we first started to explore the genome. That was the first thing and the most obvious thing that created differences, but it doesn't stop and start there. So it'll be interesting, I think, in 10 years' time, if we're able to talk about different elements within this library that we didn't know were important. That always gets me very excited as to what we'll see in the future, what developments are going to come to be. Alrighty, so I hope that answered your question there, Andrew. All right, so Deborah is asking, do the moon behavior issues link to things like having ADHD as well? So I'm going to start off by saying, I'm going to toss this one to Justin, but I'll start off by saying that our testing categorically does not offer diagnosis to any which condition, right? We're not looking at genes that say you are predisposed to ADHD or not. So for everyone's awareness, ADHD stands for attention deficit disorder or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. There's a few different variations of that. And oftentimes this is diagnosed within people with very poor scattered attention, often experiences of overwhelm. Often it's, especially now, very popular in young kids in the sense of can't focus, very hyperactive. Okay. So the question is, does our report diagnose it? The answer is no, but can it speak to qualities that are found within ADHD? I'm going to pass the illustrious mic to Mr. Harris here.
Yeah, it definitely can, right? So again, it's a non-diagnostic, way that we're going about it, but the way that your neurochemicals are processed, which person by person is different, it can certainly lend itself to propensities for different things, including ADHD, depression, anxiety, what have you. So the more areas that are going to be equating to scatterbrained kind of a tendency, I would say would be, first of all, the dopamine pathway, I believe, is relevant there. So let's say that you're a high binder of dopamine and you have a very quick clearance of dopamine via a gene called COMT, which is what methylates dopamine, and then it also clears it. So if you get this intense sensation of pleasure or reward from something, which we talked about earlier, could be from good or bad things, but it clears super quickly, you're left kind of wanting to get that spike again quickly, right? So that's going to lend itself inherently to a little bit of scatterbrain tendencies, because you're like, that was amazing. And it's like, it's over. That was amazing. It's over. Right. So you can see how that would translate there. I think that there's also a BDNF component to that as well. I think when we have lower levels of overall neuroplasticity, just the dysregulation of the brain there, and the like I mentioned earlier, the capacity to kind of fixate on a subject and then not be able to really pay attention to other subjects, I do think that that's relevant as well. I also think that some ADHD, I think there's a bit of an anxiety component there that may be not spoken of so much in the medical literature or the pharmaceutical literature. But if you have a double null, let's say, I think that just the inherent anxiousness can make you kind of be all over the place as well. So honestly, every area that we test for could lead to that as an end result, I think.
Yeah. And I think serotonin being a big guy, I know you briefly spoke to it, but serotonin, again, I think I spoke to two of its jobs before, in the sense of it regulates sense of calm, it regulates sense of appetite. Poor serotonin means you're going to be a little bit more peckish, but separately, it also will really curate focus, and lesser access to serotonin will beget much more scattered, or not necessarily scattered attention, but more difficulty being able to focus and hone attention on one thing. So for example, if you're asked to write an essay, the ticking clock, the other things, serotonin should be filtering that out. But with poor access to that, your attention's scattered between the essay and the clock, and it's much more difficult to go in. But again, remembering that attention is a muscle, right? There are true cases of ADHD, but I think by and large, there's collective agreement it's overdiagnosed, because we, number one, live in a society that does not support good attention, right? There's always things grabbing at us, but separate to that, I think it's also a muscle that we haven't naturally trained very well, because we're very indulgent in, kind of to Justin's comment, the more pleasure side of dopamine as opposed to the motivation and focus. Yeah. All righty. I hope that answered that. Greg is our fellow from Australia. Welcome down under. I won't pretend to have an accent and disparage your people, but welcome. He's asked if we could speak to him or to concepts of being on the spectrum. I'm assuming you're mentioning the autism spectrum. I'm going to table that possibly if we could maybe have you join a different webinar. We have done a lot of research into this, and I don't think per se it's something that would exclusively sit within mood and behavior. I think a lot of research around methylation pathways, and I would really encourage looking into your report for methylation pathways. And I believe the power, the voice of God, if you can hold me honest, I believe we have a webinar or two on autism, and I think that would be a better forum to kind of start that conversation there. But thank you for joining us, and we hope you continue to join us because we have a lot. Personally, I think there's a history within the company of several of our scientists having interest here, so there has been energy and effort. I'm not one that's able to speak to the extensive research we've done as robustly as them, but please, we do have webinars, and I think that would be a better avenue there. All right, Andrea, she's asking for our thoughts on long-term 5-HTP. So Justin, I'll have you speak to what exactly she means by that in a second. She's read that it needs to be cycled. She's also asking about tryptophan. And do we have any experience with this being a good choice long-term? So Justin, why don't you speak to 5-HTP, to tryptophan, kind of what she's alluding to, what this engages with, what this does?
Yeah, so, in relation to your serotonin pathways, 5-HTP is actually a hydroxytryptophan. So it's actually a precursor of L-tryptophan. You can actually take them together as well because it has a bit of a sustained kind of a release effect that way. I would look at your serotonin pathway in the first place to understand if you're regulated or dysregulated there. So 5-HTT-LPR, the one that Dr. K mentioned, and then TPH2 is the second player there because it plays a role in the degradation and the breakdown of serotonin. So we want to know how that's moving in the first place. With regard to longer term supplementation, my general view is to cycle everything. Personally, I usually cycle it, whether it's vitamin C or whatever, understanding that supplements are very new to the human experience, right? And up until very recently, we were not isolating doses of things and taking them on a day-to-day basis. So what I would honestly suggest is taking some appropriate time off and then just including some dietary sources of tryptophan to make sure that we're not dipping too low if you have dysregulation genetically. Right. So you could have, turkey and bananas and avocados and shrimp. There's a few ways that you can get some of these amino acids in there to support your brain. But I'm not a fan of being on any particular supplement 7 days a week, 365, because it's just not a natural way to approach it. So I cycle everything, and that might be 3 weeks on, 1 week off. It might be a 2 weeks and the 2 weeks. There's a few different ways that you can approach that. But my advice is to cycle it with pretty much all supplements. I don't know if you have a differing opinion there, Dr. K.
I don't disagree, but I think I have a different approach to it to a certain extent. So first of all, Andrea, I'd really want to understand why you're taking the 5-HTP, because often it's like, again, to Justin's point, that and tryptophan precursor to serotonin. The question is that a mood thing? Is that a focus thing? Is that a sleep thing? Because serotonin, tryptophan, all those sorts of things will also lend to melatonin. So kind of what's the underlying cause? And then have you investigated why you're not able to receive adequate amounts outside of supplementation? So is that a diet question? Is that as well a gut question, right? Approximately 70 to 80% of your serotonin, melatonin is managed within the gut. And so if you're taking this in compensation of some dysregulation in the gut, I'd want to dig a little bit deeper into that, right? So my question in particular, when people come into me and they're like, oh, I'm on this and that supplement, my question is, why? When did you start? Did you notice a difference? And I think to Justin's point, is there a need to cycle? I think a lot of what we do can be kind of seen as green allopathy in the sense of we're not pushing pharmaceuticals, instead we're pushing supplements. And let's be honest, sometimes like based on the way the food quality is, based on the stresses, based on some things, we might need to do that because we live in extraordinary times. But we always want to boil it down to, do we need to? Have we investigated root cause? Is the root cause something I can address? Or do I need to be on supplements? And then I think to Justin's point, that's when you look more at cycling, as well as validating with a healthcare provider that the supplement that you've chosen, the schedule you've chosen, is appropriate for you, your genes, and whatever else is going on in your life. Is that fair? Yeah. And yeah, and so please, again, I don't always want to default to go see a healthcare provider, but I think as we talk about the personalization of medicine, is the mantra of, if calories in, calories out worked, we wouldn't be here, right? Remember that there's only so much personalized advice we can offer. And I think there's incredible power in working with someone. They can help you set up the goals, they can help you set up the mindset, and they can help you evaluate if the problem is more than just where your mindset is sitting at, right? All right. Jan has a question. She says that her DNA report is GG or optimal for TPH2, and that's correct. That's the optimal presentation. So TPH2 is something that helps metabolize or make serotonin. So she's optimal in that making process. She believes that I said GG is suboptimal for TPH2, and she's asking if I could clarify. The clarification is no, GG is optimal for TPH2. The instance where it's suboptimal is actually not around TPH2, it's around BDNF. So when you have a TPH2, that's GG. When you have BDNF, that is GG. The TPH2 presentation, remember your DNA is this beautiful cyclical thing. It doesn't exist kind of on a computer screen all in a line. Some genes are closer to one another. Some will have quite literally electrophysical interactions. If you have a TPH2 that's a G words, it will suppress the activity of your BDNF, effectively making BDNF by itself, if this was just on a computer screen, is GG ideal, but based on the physics, the positioning of these two, it will suppress. So it's not an issue with GG being poor for BDNF, or sorry, for TPH2, it's poor in combination for BDNF. So I hope that was helpful. All right. Our next question here is, and I'll toss this one to Justin because I know you like this. Is it true that someone with COMT AA or AG, so I'll first ask that you explain what she means by that, should avoid quercetin or green tea? If so, why?
Yeah, so it's one of these things, right, where first of all, COMT is the one that I mentioned earlier, and we talk about it in terms of your mood and behavior profile, but what it really is a methylation gene, right? So it plays other roles as far as methylating estrogens and things. Everything in your body needs to be methylated to an extent, right? Your neurotransmitters, your DNA needs to be methylated, your hormones need to be methylated. So there's G's and there's A's in that, and that's going to determine the speed of that COMT enzyme. So different nutritive substrates can up or down regulate certain genes, as we've talked about quite a bit. And what I would say is that you need to weigh these things out against the entirety of your profile, right? Because let's say you have really suboptimal detox, or you have a lot of androgen toxicity. A real reason why you should be taking green tea extract, just know that it can also impact that COMT gene as well. So we need to weigh it out against the benefit versus the potential downside there. I would say that I'm a fan personally of using green tea extract for all of the good things that it can do, but it can have an impact on that particular COMT gene. I'm trying to recall off the top of my head if it up or down regulates it. Do you remember that, Dr. K? I'm blanking a little bit. First time ever blanking.
No, it's good. It's good. I can't word tonight. You're blanking. We're good. We're a unit. I love it. So for people with a poor COMT presentation, in particular COMT AA, I wouldn't be as concerned with AG. It can push methylation too quick and too fast. So remember, methylation is this happy little relay race. COMT is the last guy to get the baton. If you have a very slow COMT, if you have that AA presentation, items like quercetin, like green tea extract, are kind of pushing that to a point where COMT can't keep up. And that tends to be where this hiccup is. So people with COMT-AA, you really need to be mindful of not pushing too many methylated B vitamins your way, not pushing too many B vitamins in general, but also things like quercetin and green tea need to be of a lower dose. Exactly what that lower dose is will depend very much on age, body weight, body size, metabolism, et cetera, et cetera. By and large, I say COMT-AA, especially in smaller folk, between 100 and 200, bigger bodies might be able to manage more than 300 or 400. Again, there's very much an element of personalization there. Yeah, and I think that was very well answered, though. Thank you, Justin.
Thank you.
All right. Tina is asking, under which report do we find TPH2? If you look in, Justin, hold me honest, you might know this a bit better. If you look into, I believe, our mood and behavior summary, one of the first few pages should be a full listing of your genes. It will definitely be there. You'll also find it in your sleep reports. Again, I think in the summary section, both summary sections of sleep and mood and behavior will list out all of these guys, and so you'll find your TPH2 there. It's definitely in the sub-reports. I just could not tell you which one off the top of my head. It is evening where I am, and it's been a long day. All right. The next question we have, I think we already answered it. It's a question around BDNF and that epistatic interaction. So we got that one there. Oh, okay. Here's one. So Carol is asking which of our products, or I guess supplements in general, so we'll kind of speak to both. We can speak to what we offer, we can speak to the elements within, contain precursors to glutathione. Yeah. Oh, go ahead. I saw you. I'll let you go.
Yeah. So I was just going to say that we talk a lot about glutathione and generally in our practice, because some people do better taking glutathione in and of itself, particularly if you have 2 copies of a gene called GST-T1, which is kind of the big brother or sister of the glutathione family. GST-T1 is associated with detox at the level of the liver, right? So it's very important, being that that's what the liver's job is. And it's an interesting nuance, because if you have less than 2 copies of GST-T1, using glutathione in and of itself, as an intervention may actually have some downsides, because the actual processing of it isn't going to be as optimal as you would like. So what we find is, if you take a big dose of glutathione itself and you have less copies of GST-T1, what can happen is that it can bind to minerals, and it can actually rob your body of different minerals. And we actually have had people that have taken big liposomal or intravenous drips of glutathione and ended up bedridden because of it. So know that gene first of all, but if you can't process large amounts of glutathione, then we have to rely on the building blocks of glutathione, right? So we have to give your body that NAC, that selenium. There's quite a few things that build glutathione: glycine, glutamine. They all play a little bit of a role there. With regard to the product, there's one called Detox Optimizer, and that's what it was formulated for, was to kind of upregulate the glutathione pathway with those precursors. So it's got the selenium and the alpha lipoic acid in there to help upregulate the pathway.
Lovely. Thank you. I like that. The next question we have here is from Doug. And Doug's offered that his wife has muscular dystrophy, my heart to both, which results in repeats in one gene, in one of the genes. He's asking if this can be detected in our testing, and can it be addressed somehow? So 2 answers for that. I think the first answer is no, we don't do full genome sequencing or kind of disease diagnostic or disease investigative. From a genetic perspective, we don't offer that sort of testing here. So the larger answer is no. You'd need to work with a geneticist. Often they're found within hospitals. Depends on what country or where you're coming from. They'll work in different capacities based on where you are, through clinics, through hospitals. So you'd need to work with a geneticist on that. But what we can do, and again, I'm not trying to sell you the test, I just want to offer the power and the context of what we do. separate from whatever genetic counseling that clinician or that geneticist can offer you. We do look more at functional genes in the day-to-day. So this can be something that really supports how, outside of what you need to do specific to the disease, can you live your life to reduce burden on the body and to optimize what is happening within the body, optimize the mental experience of it, optimize the detox of it all. How do you go about those sorts of things? Because we never want to boil a person down to a singular condition and forget that they have a body and a life outside of that. So that's where our testing can come in, not in the disease defining and investigative side of things, but more in the how do we support a better and full life? Because we never want to reduce a person down to one condition, right? Irina has asked, can we speak to the MAO gene, its role in general, and maybe mention its potential role in schizophrenia? Thank you. So MAO stands for, and Justin, hold me honest, monoamine oxidase, right?
Yes.
Yes, words today. So what this guy is helps break down a certain group of neurotransmitters, a lot of our dopamine, a lot of our serotonin, noradrenalines, et cetera. And so people with different presentations of this gene will break them down at different rates. And there's value and drawback to all. It's kind of like COMT, right? COMT will help break down dopamine just like it helps break down noradrenaline. Do you want to be fast at breaking down noradrenaline, that thing that gives you a scare? Yes, you do. Do you want to be fast at breaking down your dopamine? Not necessarily. So MAO's kind of in this double-edged sword in the sense that it helps with this breakdown. And again, it's not better or worse either side, right? It's more an awareness. I think, especially when we look at it from more a functional perspective, we find COMT tends to do more of the work compared to MAO. It's not to dismiss its role. It's just to say it's not the only guy working and chipping away at things in the brain. In regards to schizophrenia, there are certain presentations, and I'd need to brush up on my literature because I don't want to misguide you. I forget if it's the side of poorly breaking down, or I believe it's not breaking down quickly, that can lend to, or at least be correlated to, schizophrenic presentations. It's not a one gene defines and determines the disease. It's just something we see high correlation with. So we do test that. It is reported on within the mood behavior section. Again, go to that summary section to see what you are. But I would not call that disease defining by any stretch of the imagination. Schizophrenia are complex illnesses, both genetically and then environmentally. So it contributes, but I wouldn't say it's kind of the one gene that we would rest a diagnosis upon. Anything else to offer there, Sibel?
Yeah, you pretty much nailed that one. It is a very complicated thing, and one gene doesn't have, it's not an N equals one thing. I would say that every area of the body is kind of connected to every other area of the body. Like where does your endocrine system begin and end? Where does your cardiovascular system begin and end? Right? Where does your skeletal system begin and end? So having this template of genes that we can look at can have some downstream effects of improving any disease that we have to talk about, right? The way your body detoxes is going to matter for your brain health. You know, the way that your body deals with inflammation is going to matter for your brain health. So, you know, we try not to be super specific about diseases in particular, but maybe there's micronutrient deficiencies. Genetically, we can look at that a little bit, right? There could be hormone toxicity present. There could be any number of these things. So I really encourage you to use your reports to get the absolute most out of them. Upregulate any area that you're suboptimal, and it might have a downstream effect of improving the symptomology of any given disease.
Yeah. I really encourage that. And again, I'd echo back a little bit to the concept of muscular dystrophy and not reducing one person down to one condition. I think I've supported people adjunctively, not as a primary psychiatrist. That's not my role, but I work with a psychiatrist. And I find one of the sadder things I see is that when people are diagnosed with these sorts of conditions, we kind of forget that they're a person and we just focus on that. And improving nutrition does not fix it, but it significantly helps and improves and creates more space. It's just kind of like what we were talking about with BDNF. If you're stuck in a little bit of a depressive or anxious rut, sometimes that supplement can give you a little bit of space with which to grab on separately, just like within more complicated illness presentations. Having genes that tell you this is how you metabolize and this is how it impacts your brain and this is what it does, can give you a little bit of space so that you can use other agents to continue to support you. And that's the hope and the goal here. Right. All right. We have one last question before we close it up. I know I'm seeing a few people within the comments saying they have to go. So because I know we kind of always honor it to 90 minutes. So we'll answer this question, but to those that have to go, thank you so very much for being here. We really, really, really value and appreciate you joining us in this community. It is such a community effort. And I know today kind of took a little bit of a turn away from how do we support weight loss goals, but mental health and the capacity to kind of get out of ruts and be aware of how we can fall into ruts, right? That disrupt our exercise, that disrupt our health goals are really important. So thank you for us entering into this conversation, because it's not necessarily a conversation that's had often in regards to it being a game-changing factor with how you go about approaching health goals. Our last question before we sign off here, before my voice decides to go away. Some of the recommendations were precise, like specific vitamins, and others were more vague, like mood optimizer. Where would we find out what the more general ones are? I think, Chris, and feel free to give us feedback here. I think you're referring to, I think you're referring to our reports, in that when you see reports in particular in the mood behavior section, if there's anything that's been deemed suboptimal, right, you're at risk for anxious tendencies, you're at risk for poor focus, we tend to put some recommendations there. I think that's what you're getting at, but please clarify if that's not what you're getting at. We're very strategic in that the report, because we don't know your health picture, our recommendations tend to sit a little bit more on the general side of things, because again, this is precision medicine, this is personalized medicine. The goal is for you and community to work with a healthcare provider to truly understand, are there really good recommendations that you can implement? Absolutely. We go into a lot of lifestyle stuff. We make general supplement and vitamin recommendations, but the exact execution of that needs to sit between you and your healthcare provider and someone who knows the fullness of your health. Because again, remember, we talk often with the genome here. Not every, you can have certain SNPs that are the same, but how they've been engaged by the world is going to change truly how they present. So for example, a lot of people might have a profile that predisposes them towards anxiety and depression, but if they're getting with Felicia, if they're getting with Justin, they're working on their body, they're working on their mindset, those genes aren't necessarily going to express in their fullness, right? Which is why it's important to work with a healthcare provider and not take the recommendations straight up. They need to be taken in context of, are you exercising? Are you eating well? Are you doing the things before we start tossing supplements in, which is kind of what we said in regards to 5-HTP, and is it good to be on it long term? Yeah. So I hope that answered and offered questions and support to everyone. We're so very grateful again that you've been here. I'm so very grateful to Felicia and Justin, who so steadfastly join in. Please, guys, do you have any closing thoughts before we wish our audience well, our community well? Please do join our Facebook group. Be part of a group with one another and support of one another, right? In particular on those days where it's difficult to get out of bed and difficult to stick to whatever goal you have.
I just want to say, I'll leave you with three things: be active, be grateful, and self-positive talk. That's what I leave you with. This was fun.
Yeah,
Fun day.
I'll echo that. Stop talking yourself out of it. Start talking yourself into it. That's what we're doing here. Talk yourself into life and into success, right? You can do it moment by moment. Your mind is yours and it belongs to you and it's sacred, right? So treat it like that and you'll get real far.
Yeah. And I think just to complement that, I'd also add, if you're struggling to get that traction, to leverage being active, to leverage mindset, to leverage your plan, reach out for help and support, right? Because maybe your plan needs to incorporate someone who can get that fuller vision of you and support those more intelligent next steps, right? We don't want you spinning around in a ball. We want you well supported. And we know that in particular with mental health, often it needs to be very carefully understood and then carefully directed. Do you need to take wheat out of your diet like I had to do? Or do we need to do more of that mindset work? Do we need to get you into the gym, right? reaching out, seeking support from a healthcare provider, as well as from community, is exceptionally important. And so we hope that to the end of learning your genes better, learning mindset tactics, learning exercise, learning all the lovely little things that can get you feeling good and get you into a place where you're able to gain traction and shift your life. We're so privileged and pleasured by being able to support you in this journey. Words, it's the end of my day. My words are done, guys, and I'm going to sign off before I offer words that make no more sense. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. I believe because this is a missed week in the sense that this was supposed to be last week, we're probably meeting together next week again. Hopefully I'll have a voice at that point in time, no more cough, but please do check our Facebook group because that will have exactly when we're meeting up. So again, thank you so very much. Have the most delightful of evenings, afternoons, or days, whatever time zone you're coming to us in, and we'll see you in about a week's time. Au revoir. Au revoir.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good
Bye,
night.
guys.
Bye, thank you.